I've been perfecting this Arc Hunter build as far back as episode Revenant, and now in Edge of Fate, it's gotten even better, and I'm confident in saying it is the strongest Hunter build in Destiny 2, with a level of destruction comparable to some of the strongest Titan and Warlock builds, while also granting you the power of 3 Thunder Crashes in the palm of your hand. I've tested it everywhere, from Mythic Kepler missions to -40 GM portal activities in both group content and solo, and surprisingly, the raw damage Arc Staff can output also makes it a meta choice for the close range bosses in Desert Perpetual. Wait, scratch that. I was excited to take this build into the epic raid, and I was excited to teach you guys how to do good boss damage with it, but I guess that's off the table now, since Bungie is removing the interaction melee-based roaming supers had with the melee stat, and I'm quite sad about this. We had different supers be viable for boss damage for once, and it's immediately gutted. Back to spamming T-crashes, or Thunderlords, I guess. I go on a long rant about this later, but essentially I think this is 100% the wrong move. A lot of the footage in this video uses 200 melee stat and 200 super stat, but even since that's going away, the build is still top tier. I've since gone back into mythic missions and -40 GMs without the 200 melee buff, and it's still very strong, and still one of my favorite builds. We're just not going to be using it against raid bosses anymore. Well, back to the regularly scheduled video. With the ability to generate dozens of supers and make hundreds of orbs per activity, alongside having complete control over the battlefield, this build is undeniably one of the strongest builds in Destiny 2. Today's build revolves around one core combo, the Arc Staff super on the Arc subclass, and combining it with the exotic chess piece Raiden Flux. But before you can become a master of the Arc Staff, you must understand the neutral game kit that lets us dominate when outside of our super. As always, if you just want a screenshot of the entire build, go to this timestamp on screen. There is a lot going on here, so I highly recommend watching the whole video to get a full understanding of the build. Now, as we begin with our subclass, I need to highlight a crossroads I've reached. You see, for as long as I've used this build, all the way up until now, my preferred melee has always been Disorienting Blow over Combination Blow. If you didn't know, Disorienting Blow is actually one of the strongest melees in the game, and not because it does a crazy amount of damage or anything, but because of the raw utility it provides, giving us access to blind, amplified, and bolt charge just from one melee. But recently, the pairing of Combination Blow and Tempest Strike has caught my eye, since it has been massively buffed in Edge of Fate, letting you get the healing, dodge regeneration, and damage from Combination Blow on kills with Tempest Strike. Just a quick PSA, I've seen some confusion on how Tempest Strike activates Combo Blow, and it doesn't have anything to do with Jolt taking the kill or red bars or anything like that. To get this to work on any enemy, you just need to have dealt any amount of damage to the enemy first before killing them with Tempest Strike. Yes, it's still finicky and awkward, but that's how it works. Anyway, I've tested both versions of the build in -40 GM content as well as Mythic Kepler content, and while Tempest Strike does provide more lethality in the neutral game, I don't think we actually need that extra damage for this build. So I would say you can't go wrong with either variation of the build. They both perform roughly the same in moment-to-moment gameplay, and are both definitely strong, as you can see by comparing these end results in a match-made GM battleground. And honestly guys, as much as I love the fighting game fantasy of having Tempest Strike and Combo Blow and Ascension and looping those all together, I prefer the simplicity of the Disorienting Blow version of the build that I've been using for so long. So that is what I'll teach you about today. Hopefully by the end, you'll have a greater understanding of Arc Hunter, so you'll be able to determine which path you prefer. So the two biggest benefits we get from Disorienting Blow are Blind and Amplified. While Amplified, we have 15% damage resistance, enemies are less accurate to us, and we can gain the speed booster buff by running for a few seconds, which gives us even more damage resist. Because of the flow state aspect, being Amplified gives us even more benefits than that. Our weapons now reload insanely fast, we gain 66% damage resist while dodging, and finally, our dodge recharges much more quickly. Next up, we have Blind. Punch something, and now anything in a 10-meter radius around you will be blinded for roughly 8 seconds, giving you total control of your immediate vicinity. We can also use this melee to stun unstoppables. Now, for the third buff we get from Disorienting Blow, 2 stacks of bolt charge. We want to run Spark of Frequency so that all sources of bolt charge give an extra stack while amplified, and we get get 3 stacks from the melee instead of 2. This fragment also greatly increases our reload speed after a melee hit for 5 seconds, meaning our reload can be even faster than lightning fast. So those are the 3 buffs we get from dealing damage with Disorienting Blow. If we get a kill with our powered melee, we're gonna make an Orb of Power because of the heavy-handed mod. We want to run 3 of this mod to bring its cooldown down to 1 second. This is mainly for our super, since heavy-handed does work with the Arc Staff, letting you generate a ton of orbs for your team and yourself when getting kills with the super. This is the first of many ways we're going to be creating orbs with this build. Another source of orbs is Spark of Amplitude. Getting double kills while amplified will create an orb of power that you and your team can pick up. This fragment does have a 10-second cooldown between activations, but over the course of a whole activity, it still equates to a lot of extra orbs. Picking up orbs will be very important and give us many benefits, such as health because of the recuperation mod on our boots. The health stat will increase the amount of health you get from orbs, but we'll talk more about stats near the end once we've covered the core components of the build. Another core part of our survivability will be the fragment Spark of Resistance. When surrounded by at least 3 enemies, we gain 25% damage resistance. We've covered 3 arc verbs so far with Amp, Blind, and Bolt Charge, and now we have Jolt coming from our second aspect, Ascension. Use your class ability in the air to perform an upward twirl that makes your team amplified and jolts nearby enemies. Remember that jolting is a way we can stun overload champions. So we can use Ascension more offensively to jolt and damage enemies, or we can use it to amplify our teammates and ourselves to give us some more survivability and speed. Remember, because of the flow state aspect, when amplified, our dodge recharges really fast. So if we have a class stat in the range of 40 to 50, we're going to be getting our dodge back in around 12 seconds while amplified, meaning we can basically loop our Ascension for infinite amplified uptime. And since our dodge is Gambler's Dodge, we're going to be getting our Disorienting Blow back every time we use Ascension. This is dependent on the melee stat, but we'll go over that in a later section. Getting our melee back isn't the only benefit we get from using our class ability. The Reaper mod makes it so our next weapon kill after using our class ability will create an Orb of Power, yet another source of orb generation. And Powerful Attraction will let us collect any nearby orbs when we use our class ability. Just a great mod all around. We're going to get additional benefits from picking up orbs because of the Absolution mod on our boots. Now we get some energy for all abilities when we pick up an orb. The final ability we haven't talked about is our Grenade. Pulse Grenade is great for dealing damage over time, and it helps the most with generating super energy. Flux Grenade offers an instant high source of damage, and Flashbang Grenade is good for adding some ranged blinding utility to the kit. I tend to lean towards Pulse Grenade to help get the Arc Staff faster, but all the grenades have their benefits. No matter which we choose, we're going to run Spark of Shock to let our grenades jolt targets that they hit. Our 5th and final fragment slot will help us get our abilities back even quicker through Spark of Ions. Defeating a jolted target or a target with Bolt Charge creates Ionic Traces, which when picked up, grants energy for all 3 abilities. Before we talk about the main part of our subclass Arc Staff, let's quickly recap what we learned. We want to keep up Amplified as much as possible by using our Ascension ability or by punching enemies with Disorienting Blow. Amplified is one of the key aspects to our survivability. Next, we want to utilize Blind to disorient nearby enemies to calm the battlefield, and this also comes from our Disorienting Blow melee. And finally, Orbs of Power are our best friends, since collecting them grants things like health and ability energy. Because of that, it's very important to be aware of how and when you can generate your orbs. With the foundations of our subclass set, it's time to discuss the reason I call this build the strongest hunter build in the game. Our super, Arc Staff. Arc Staff is the main reason I call this the strongest hunter build in the game, but that super is nothing without Raiden Flux. Raiden Flux increases Arc Staff damage and duration for each hit with the super, stacking up to 3 times. This exotic is really what enables us to go on a rampage when we pop Arc Staff, because it makes the super last so much longer by simply dealing damage with it. It seems Raiden Flux got a hidden buff in Edge of Fate, because now when at 3 staffs of Synapse Junction, you're doing double damage with Arc Staff. We can buff the damage of Arc Staff even further, mainly with the super stat. But before we get into that, let's make sure you understand how to use this super effectively. We have 8 different moves we can perform in our super, and we're capable of dealing with all 3 champion types, which I'll teach you how to do. First, the basic light attack. We're going to use this for taking out most rank and file enemies and orange bar enemies in our super. Second, heavy attack. We don't use this one that much. It does have more range and a bigger spread than the light attack, but in general, it's not really worth using on its own. since it does use up a good portion of our super compared to the light attack. Third, Heavy Slam. This can be performed by using the heavy attack while in the air. This will slam you to the ground, dealing damage and causing blind. This is mostly how we'll stun unstoppables inside our super. Aside from that use case, we want to use this move sparingly since it does consume a lot of super energy. Fourth, Ascension. If Heavy Slam is the main way we stun unstops in our super, Ascension is the main way we stun overloads in our super, since it applies Jolt. Much like the Heavy Slam, we want to use this move sparingly since it does consume a lot of super energy. Fifth, Grenade. Yes, we can throw our grenade while in the super. Now, we do have some defensive options in our super. Guarding. Hold block to twirl your arc staff and deflect any damage that comes your way. Deflecting does build up bolt charge, but I basically never pay attention to this when playing. It's just not worth it. You only want to use the guard if you're really weak and desperate to survive, because this move just drains so much super energy. The better defensive move in my opinion is the dodge. This thing doesn't consume any super energy and you are very hard to hit when doing so. And finally, we have the main attack of this super, the Palm Strike combo. It is performed by quickly hitting 2 light attacks, then 1 heavy attack. This is the move we're going to use against anything that survives more than 3 light attacks, so anything from champions to mini bosses to bosses. Just remember, light, light, heavy. The final hit in the Palm Strike combo does actually inflict blind, but that rarely comes up in gameplay because this attack just does so much damage. It does so much damage, in fact, that in -40 GM content, we could just use this attack to outright destroy barrier champions without them even putting up their shield. As a general tip, we're going to be getting our super back very fast with weapon damage, so don't be afraid to use the arc staff when you get it. Now, Raid Influx is the main way we increase the damage of the super. Shield Crush from the artifact is another way we can boost its damage, but that was really only necessary when dealing raid boss damage. But since the melee stat is getting nerfed, it's sadly not worth using the super in those cases anymore. But we can still buff Arc Staff with the super stat. Let's talk about that. The main stat we want to invest in for this build is the super stat, because when we have it at 200, our super deals 45% more damage. So I normally get this stat to as close to 160 as possible. That way we can run 2 super font mods on our helmet, which make it so when we have armor charges, we get plus 40 to the super stat, effectively putting us at 200. Armor charges are very easy to get with this build considering how many orbs we can make. It's even easier to get armor charges because of stacks on our boots, which gives 2 armor charges for every orb we pick up. And then we run charged up on our chest piece, which lets us hold up to 4 armor charges. Be aware that you can't collect armor charges while in your super. So in order to get the benefits of these font mods in Arc Staff, you need to collect orbs and have armor charges before you enter the super. Now, when it comes to your other stats, normally I would have said to up your melee stat as high as possible for even more super damage. Unfortunately, that's no longer a thing. So now, I think we just want to aim for around 50 to 70 melee. In Ash and Iron, you will need 100 melee to get the full charge back when dodging away from enemies, but if you use your class ability near enemies, you get double the energy. So the 50 to 70 range should be a good middle ground, plus don't forget that bolt charge stacks do give us melee energy. Then we want to aim for 40 to 50 on the class stat so we can loop our Ascension and Amplified. As for the 3 remaining stats in health, grenade, and weapons, there isn't anything we need to specifically invest in. I will say I do like to run 2 health font mods on the chest piece. The health stat gives us more health when picking up orbs, and since we make a lot of orbs with this build, the health stat is actually quite helpful for our survivability. So 3 of our stats have specific goals for the build, and the other 3 are just nice bonuses that don't require specific investment. It's really up to you how you want to split your stat points between these 3 stats. I recommend using D2 Armor Picker, which is a great site to determine what stats are possible with your available armor. You can also choose specific fragments, and you can even specify if you only want to use new gear, legendary armor. And one final note for this section, what about armor set bonuses? First and foremost, there aren't any armor set bonuses that are must have for this build. However, I really like running the 2-piece Bushido set for some extra healing on weapon kills, and then I like pairing that with the 2-piece set from Trials, which gives health on ammo pickup. We're doing a ton of special finishers, and each time we do one of those, because of this set, we're getting a good chunk of our health back. Though I would prioritize getting the stats correct before worrying about the armor set bonuses. Now, let's wrap up the build by going over our weapons. In this build, your weapon loadout is largely independent from the subclass, and it mainly depends on what type of activity you're doing. This means we have a lot of flexibility and variety in our weapon choice. Even though there aren't any specific weapons we need, we can still highlight a general purpose our weapons serve for this build. Weapon damage generating our super quickly. So whether it's dealing damage with Mint Retrograde, or a good primary like the Solstice SMG, or a heavy machine gun, weapon damage is the key to how we can generate so many supers in an activity. A niche weapon I quite like to use in this build is Salvation's Grip. Not only does it give Frost Armor, which helps with survivability, and technically it does help you with Shield Crush, but it also lets you generate a ton of super energy if you encase a bunch of enemies in stasis crystals and then shatter them with Ascension. It's pretty fun, I recommend trying it out. But in general, for our kinetic slot, Mint Retrograde is a no-brainer. This thing is obviously amazing, and it's great for dealing with barrier champs, as those aren't natively covered by our subclass. Mint Retrograde can chew through ammo pretty fast, especially since we're not invested in the weapon stat, but that's not a problem because of Special Finisher on our class item. When we have 3 armor charges, finish an enemy to make special ammo. We've already established how many orbs and armor charges we're collecting, so we can have some very high uptime on Special Finisher. In this clip, I think I did 4 special finishers in the span of like 20 seconds. So this is obviously great for getting you special ammo, but it also means your team will almost always be topped up on their special. In the energy slot, you could go with a solid primary weapon like the Solstice SMG or the Arms Day Spreadshot hand cannon, just to name a few, but you could also rock double special with Choir of One, for example. With the amount of special finishes we can do, and with how much of our killing is done with Arc Staff, double special is pretty sustainable here. Finally, in the heavy slot, I know people like Eager Edge swords, so you could definitely run that. Other great options are explosive light grenade launchers such as Outrageous Fortune, or you could go with a solid machine gun such as the Trials one, or even something like Corrective Measure, which is still a beast. And that wraps up our discussion about weapons. Definitely a lot of choices, definitely some ways you can spice it up with your weapon loadout. Just one more thing, we have an extra mod slot on our helmet, and here I normally run a Siphon mod to make us even more orbs, and I usually run one to synergize with the weapon I use most. Currently, that is Strand Siphon to pair with Mint Retrograde. And with that said, we've basically covered every component of the build. Now, let's head over to the final recap. On screen is the general loadout recommendation I use, but I also have a dim link down in the description. Our playstyle with this build benefits from us being up close and personal to the enemies, so we can apply blind with our melee and to collect orbs of power that we make, since we get a ton of benefits from picking them up. When we're at further ranges, we're taking advantage of our infinite amplified uptime through Ascension for that extra survivability, and we're dealing damage with our weapons to generate super energy fast. We're also getting a ton of ammo for our special weapons like Mint Retrograde, thanks to the great amount of special finishers we can perform. When we get our super, we can shred through enemies thanks to the power of Radiant Flux and 200 super stat. Don't forget, when going up against chunkier guys, use that Palm Strike combo. Light, light, heavy. Some artifact mods do help out the build, but none of them are needed, and this build will still be S tier in future seasons, no matter what the artifact is. And that's all for what I believe to be the strongest hunter build in Destiny 2. Now, time for me to rant, and I hope you guys take some time to listen. So, Bungie announced in the sandbox preview that the melee stat will no longer buff the damage of certain melee-based supers. At 200 melee, this would be a 30% buff to things like Song of Flame, Silk Strike, and the focus of this build, Arc Staff. I'm honestly really sad about this, not only because it made me rewrite portions of this video, or the fact that I was really excited about taking this build into the Epic Raid, and now that just seems like a lost cause, but I'm mainly sad about it because I got my hopes up about this hidden interaction that just felt right in the sandbox of Destiny 2. It seemed like it fit right into the philosophy Bungie was talking about, where there are some things they want the players to discover and share with the community. It just felt right. You're making a heavy investment into 2 stats, meaning you're sacrificing all your other stats to reap the rewards. Now, I don't know exactly why Bungie got rid of this. They claimed it's cleaner and more consistent this way, and I just disagree. It made perfect sense that it would work this way. It's a melee-based super, you're using the melee input. That interaction between Arc Staff and the melee stat was one of the first things I tested in Edge of Fate, and it's why I used Arc Staff in the contest Desert Perpetual. And this opens up even more questions. Is Arc Staff not supposed to work with heavy-handed? Is the Brawler modifier not supposed to work with Arc Staff? And this is also inconsistent with, the number of hidden exotic interactions we've gotten that are stated nowhere in the game. Things such as necrotic grips interactions with weapons of sorrow, or Slayer's Fang dealing bonus damage to Scorn, or Mask of Backrest buffing Lord of Wolves, those things are arguably harder to test and less intuitive than, the melee stat buffing melee based supers. If the reasoning is that they simply want every stat to only interact with one specific thing, then I guess I understand, but at the same time, I feel like it's good to break the mold sometimes, to let us have fun, let us build craft more, not less. And also in that case, why does grapple melee benefit from both the grenade and melee stat? I'm not saying it should or shouldn't, but if that can, why not these underused roaming supers? So that's one point. Another possibility is maybe they thought it was just too strong. Although they didn't say that, maybe they don't want roaming supers dominating the meta. But then in that case, the logic is just wrong, because it wasn't the melee stat making this thing a monster against raid bosses, it was really Shield Crush, a 50% buff, which you could have the whole super by simply having a hunter throw the Dusk Field to give frost armor. So when that's gone, it's like an overall 46% nerf to Arcstaff's max potential damage compared to now. And on top of that, roaming supers like Arcstaff already have hurdles besides raw damage that make them less desirable in certain pieces of content, such as airborne bosses and poor hit registration and tracking on certain enemies. Guys, the sandbox and build crafting is my favorite thing about this game. It's the reason I've stuck around and played during seasons where the content wasn't that good. I would just make new builds and test them out in GM Nightfalls, and that was fun. But when they do stuff like this, it makes me sad. And when they do stuff like Avant-Garde, it makes me sad. In an ideal world, I would hope they go back on this or just buff roaming supers by 30% against bosses to make up for it. The reality is they're not going to do that because one guy asked for it in a YouTube video. So I guess for the epic raid, or anytime I run this raid on Hunter for that matter, it's just back to Golden Gun or grapple melee spam, or switching over to Titan for T-Crash. That's all I have to say on that. Thanks for listening. Feel free to ask me any questions you have about the build down in the comments. If you found the video entertaining or helpful, a like and sub would be greatly appreciated. I really wanted to make the best build video I possibly could with this one, and I hope I succeeded. Have a great day, everyone. See you soon.